The third thing that happens is addiction. One of my favorite definitions of addiction, and I've had the privilege of teaching 4 or 5 times at Denver Seminary, the addictions class, and it's by a man named John Bradshaw, and he simply says that an addiction is a pathological or an unhealthy relationship that you have with a substance, a process, or a person. And the reason why I like that is because everybody's an addict. You know, we all have things in our life that we love too much. We all have things that can become idols. But addiction has 5 components of it. And the first is self-deception. Interestingly, which is a biblical category in multiple places, but right in that passage in James where it talks about temptation, it says, don't be self-deceived. Every good and perfect gift comes from God. God gives designer gifts, and then of course there's a deceiver who gives deceiver gifts, saying that you can get something that will bring satisfaction to your soul, and it's not from God. You can get it within your own grasp. And so self-deception allows us to go into that. Self-deception allows us to say, this won't be a problem. I won't do this again. It's just this one time. This really won't affect me. You know, since my wife or husband doesn't find out, or since mom or dad doesn't find out, it's really okay. And that opens the door to the compulsive pattern of addiction. The second thing is, I mentioned it earlier, tolerance. You need more and more of the same drug to get the same effect. And that's true with heroin, it's true with cocaine, it's true with pornography, and scientists are beginning to make that link. Tolerance, but also withdrawal. So both of those have to be together clinically for it to be a real addiction. But withdrawal is that when you remove the substance, process, or behavior, what happens is a person goes through withdrawal. And there may not be as strong of a physiological withdrawal like going into the DTs and needing detox, but with pornography, what I've seen in my practice is that people become irritable, they have mood swings, their coping strategy is taken away, they get headaches, they have somatic complaints, pains throughout their body, racing heart, panic, things like that. The fourth aspect of addiction has to do with powerlessness. The fourth one has to do with a distortion of attention or a sense of being preoccupied, that more and more of your time, more and more of your energy, more and more of your attention goes into that behavior, even though there are adverse consequences to it. The fifth aspect of addiction has to do with powerlessness. And powerlessness takes away free agency. A person who is truly an addict can't just say, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, without entering into a larger healing process. A person who's an addict cannot just say, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to have my quiet time today and get some accountability, and I'm just going to be able to overcome this. A person who's an addict is really powerless. And that's becoming increasingly common for teenagers and as well as for kids. And we're going to see some more videos of the kids talking. The second last thing is escalation. And I've referred to this, but it's the idea that once you become addicted and there's this tolerance factor, you have to keep upping it and upping it and upping it. And I know men who have spent, and women too, who have spent hours and hours and hours and hours. I talked to someone very recently who stayed up until 5 in the morning looking for that perfect picture that was just the right fix that was going to give that to them. And of course, that took them into an area that they never thought they would go to. Like the frog in the kettle, that person said, how did I get here? How did this happen? The last thing is aggression. Increasingly, there are studies, and for a long time they were debunked by a lot of people in the left-leaning social services field that said there are no correlations between pornography and sexual aggression. There are no correlations between pornography and sexual assault and rape. They can't say that anymore. Science is backing this up. It's absolutely, positively true. And then lastly, acting out. Acting out, and this is what's happening with the child pornographers and the predators, is people eventually want to do what they see happening. Just like that little kid taking a bath. Whoops, back up. How do we safeguard our kids? And this really is the question of the evening. That's the bad stuff. You're going to see a couple more video clips, but I kind of got past the hard part to talk about, and now we get to talk about what's the treatment. If that's the disease, what's the treatment? And again, we're going to talk about relational things that we do with our kids that are rules. We're going to talk about technological things that are tools that are really to empower you as a parent. In the handout that you received, and all of those checklists are complements of enoughisenough.org, Donna Rice Hughes organization. There is a checklist for you as parents of what you need to know and what you need to be aware of. I'm going to review most of those as we go through. There is what's called a buddy checklist so that you as a parent can have accountability that you're actually implementing these things in your home. And then there's a youth agreement so that you can sit down with your kid, talk about this out in the open. And by the way, your kid wants you to do this. Our kids are craving boundaries. Our kids are craving and longing for us as parents to engage with them, even though they might go, I don't know, or fine, or I don't want to talk about it. They want us to pursue their hearts. And that checklist gives you a great way to do that. And so before I talk about any of the rules, the relational safeguards, I want to encourage us to foster a lifelong conversation about healthy sexuality within God's protective boundaries. And I don't mean to be offensive, but we need to go beyond the just don't do it. This is what the Bible says, and let's pursue purity. Purity is the result of pursuing something else. You know, as I taught at Denver Seminary since 2000, and prior to that I taught for 5 years as a full-time professor at Colorado Christian in the counseling program. And over the years I have seen an exact reverse correlation between children that grew up in Christian homes and children that grew up in non-Christian homes. Who do you think had the healthier approach to sexuality? You would think that it's the Christian kids. But when people wrote their sexual development papers, which if you're going to be a good counselor, you've got to kind of do your own work and know your own story and your own brokenness. And so as a requirement, they had to write these papers about their sexual history. You know, where did you first learn about sexuality? What were the beliefs in your family? And most of the people that grew up in Christian homes internalized a message that sex was bad, sex was dirty, that sexual feelings needed to be suppressed. What happens when those kids come along and see sexually explicit images, and rather than bring them out in the open and say, Mom and Dad, this is what happened, they push them down? Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, and this is a profound quote, it's interesting that Bonhoeffer said it, the pursuit of purity is not about the suppression of lust, but about the reorientation of our life to a larger goal. There was something about the kids that grew up in the non-Christian homes where they didn't have God's protective boundaries in place, but they didn't have this idea that sex is dirty and sex is bad and sex is shameful and that's something we don't talk about. And when they got to that place of finally becoming Christians, they didn't have a lot of baggage that other people had that knew Jesus, and that was pretty sad to me. So we're going to talk about establishing rules and tools, and it's important to follow through in implementing them. As I've said, that the rules are relational safeguards that set clear expectations for the kids. The tools empower you, the rules empower the kids to make good choices. And the first thing is, and you saw this in the video with the kids, is to establish ongoing dialogue and to keep the lines of communication open. People often ask me, you know, what shall I do if my kid sees porn? Or what shall I do if my kid is struggling with porn? And one of the things that you don't do is you don't ignore it. And you don't judge and you don't shame. And you just say, even if you say, I don't know what to do, say, I don't know what to do, but you know what? I care about your heart, and let's talk about your heart. Supervise use of all internet-enabled devices, including computers, laptops, phones, iPods, and gaming systems. And again, these slides and the information here are on those checklists. I'm surprised by the number of families, and yes, the number of Christian families, that don't supervise the internet use, that give their kids free access. One of the things here, it's kind of a standard idea, but to have the computer and internet access only available in one place and in a place where it's a generally visible area of the home. I do not encourage computers to be in bedrooms or in basement rooms or in private places where you don't have access to those kids. Know your child's online activity and their online friends. Know what they do on the internet. Know, generally speaking, what times of day, who they're talking to, who they're connecting with. Sexual predators that are reaching out to kids, young children as well as teens, are doing this, and they're posing as peers. And they'll do this for weeks and weeks and weeks and months until finally they set up a meeting and then they're not who they thought they were. Regularly check your kids' online communities, such as social networking and gaming sites. Increasingly, gaming sites are becoming social networking opportunities. And be aware of the information that they're posting. You want to know how to find out if your kid is on MySpace or one of the social networking sites? Even if you ask them and they say no, you can type in their name, and if they're on MySpace, their name will come up. And then you can find out by kind of doing that stealth research on your own. Supervise the photos and videos that your kids post and send online. Now, for those of you that were here at the parent meeting, you know about the iPad direction that the school is going. And I couldn't support that more. I think that's tremendous. I'm a big Apple and Mac person, even though Dan Sarian had to give me a PC remote because my Apple remote didn't work. But this is going to be a huge issue. Yesterday, the iPad 2 was released, and it has a front and back camera. And now the feature that most people want an iPad for, in addition to everything else, is that I think it has a 5-megapixel camera and HD video. That kids can just pick it up and take HD video and have real-time chats face-to-face with the Apple program called FaceTime. That's something that I hope to work with the school to develop policies and boundaries and things like that. But when kids get those iPads in their hands, they can communicate with anybody, anywhere in the world who may not be who they say they are. And this is something that is going to be increasingly an issue. I don't know if anybody has ever seen anything like this at the health club where I go in the locker room. There's a sign on the wall. It is illegal and forbidden to use your cell phone or any digital device to take pictures. Duh, in the locker room. But we have to say that because technology has changed, and kids that are these digital natives are just growing up with, you take pictures everywhere. Discourage or limit the use of webcams and mobile video. Now that might sound like I'm just contradicting myself, but severely limiting it and making sure that there is parental supervision and or knowing exactly who they are talking to. Establish an agreement with your kids, and this is what the youth checklist is. I think it's the 3rd or 4th page that you have. You will sit down with them and say, here's what we're going to do, and here's our understanding for when you're in the home and when you're outside of the home. When you're at friends, here are the expectations and the boundaries. And talk with your kid. What will you do if you're outside of our home and you're at Johnny's or Susie's and someone is chatting and something's inappropriate, or if images come up? What will you do? And the way that the agreement talks about it there is that they will come to you as a parent and share with you anything that's inappropriate or anything that makes them uncomfortable. And I think that's a good phrase. It's not just the rule of it's inappropriate or it's immoral or Scripture says it's wrong, but talking about their hearts. Proverbs 4, right? Guard your heart. The Message says in Proverbs 4, keep vigilant watch over your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. And those conversations that we can foster with our kids of, wow, when that happened, how did that make you feel? Well, I was kind of embarrassed. Really, tell me about that. And if your kid shuts down, pursue them. And if they don't talk to you, send them a text. Send them an email. Engage with them on their terms. Become incarnational, but enter into their life. They're dying for you to do that. So we've talked about rules. And there's a few that I didn't talk about that are on the sheet. But the tools are the technological safeguards. Let's go into those. Set age-appropriate filters. That is not an appropriate filter. The parent's hand in front of the girl's eye. The most basic filters are in your operating system. With Windows and PC, they're in there, and there are age-appropriate limits, and you can set those right within the operating system. And with the Mac operating system as well, you can set age-appropriate filters.